Hello everyone, hope all is well. So I've had some people ask me about the Trespass to Property Act. Their concern is that they might walk into a location, they might ask for the ouchie fauchie status, and upon refusal of showing that ouchie fauchie status, that they might be accused of trespassing if they don't leave. And this is a very reasonable concern. So let me start out the gate by saying this. I am not a lawyer. I am a Canadian citizen who believes that the Canadian Constitution, such as our Canadian Bill of Rights, protects us from discrimination. And it is wrong to discriminate against us for not telling people what our medicinal status is when it is illegal for them to collect that information against my will. We have things such as the Privacy Act that says so. We have things like the Canadian Human Rights Act and the Canadian Bill of Rights. When I look at the Trespass to Property Act, I'm going to go through this. I just want to really drive home that I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you what I'm going to do if I'm faced with such a situation. So let's continue. And for the purpose of this video, we're going to use the Ontario Trespass to Property Act, but understand that if you live outside of Ontario and yet you are in Canada, you will have a similar Trespass to Property Act because it will have to concur with the law of the land and the Canadian Constitution. So let's continue on, and I'm going to take you here into the definition section, and it says, in this act, occupier includes a person who is in physical possession of the premise, or a person who has responsibility for and control over the condition of premises, or the activities there carried on, or control over persons allowed to enter the premise. So you're not the occupier. The person that is in physical possession of the premise is the occupier. Now I'm going to scroll down to section 2 because this is really important, because ultimately I'm going to try to set up a situation for myself if faced with anything of this nature, that I don't want to be the defendant. I want to be the plaintiff. That's where I'm going with this. This section says trespass an offense. So if you do the following, this is when they can accuse you of trespassing and put a charge against you. So again, our intention is to not get this charge and become the plaintiff. And this is what it says. Every person who is not acting under a right, very important. Every person is you, myself, Jack, Jill, any person who's a customer, okay? You're the every person who potentially is not acting under a right or authority conferred by law. And that's when, if you don't leave the premise immediately after you are directed to do so by the occupier of the premise, then you are guilty of an offense potentially, and upon conviction, you would be liable to a fine of up to $10,000, okay? And again, I'm going to stress this. If you are a person who is not acting under a right or authority conferred by law. However, this is my point as to why I'm going to suggest to you that you are acting under a right and authority conferred by law. And so this is what I'm going to do. If someone comes up to me and says, Shade, what's your ouchie fauchie status? And I say, well, that's private. I'm not going to share that information with you one way or the other. Whether I have it or not, I'm not sharing it with you. It's private. Well, if you don't show that to us, we're going to tell you to leave. So you're telling me to leave because I won't tell you what my private medicinal information is? Yes, that's our policy. We're asking you to leave, or we'll charge you with trespassing. Guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to leave the premise immediately after I'm directed to do so by the occupier. Why? So they can't charge me for trespassing. See, as long as I leave when they tell me to leave, I can leave and not get a charge. Why do I want to do that? Because I don't want to be the defendant that ends up having to try to countersue. No. What I want to do is make them become the defendant. And how am I going to do that? Well, let's go to the criminal code. And this is federal law right here. So what the person is doing when they're telling you to leave and they believe they're acting under an authority to do so, they may not realize it, but they're acting as an agent. They're acting like a police officer, a peace officer, or a public officer, and that puts them under federal jurisdiction. And guess what? Police officers are federally regulated, and therefore this is under a federal criminal code. So let's pay attention to this. It says everyone who is required or authorized by law to do anything in the administration or enforcement of the law, and that's what the person is doing when they are kicking you out, they're enforcing, but they're doing it as a private person. See that? They might think, well, no, I'm not a police officer. Well, guess what? You just became like a police officer according to the criminal code. Why? Because you are enforcing the law. See? As soon as you become a law enforcement agent, even as a private person, even if you're aiding a peace officer or public officer, guess what? You fall under this jurisdiction. So you better make sure that you what? Look at the bottom here. If he acts on reasonable grounds, justified in doing what he is required. Well, guess what? I'm going to say you were not justified in kicking me out. And I'm going to say your grounds for kicking me out was not reasonable. In fact, not only was it unreasonable and unjustified, it was illegal. And I'm going to, now that you are under this federal jurisdiction, I'm going to sue you and make you become the defendant. Joe or Joe's employee, doesn't matter. Whoever's hitting me with the bat is going to get charged with hitting me with the bat. And I'm going to say Canadian Bill of Rights right here, which is under federal jurisdiction. That's why you can see the similar heading, just like the Canadian Human Rights Act, right? I'm going to pull out the Canadian Bill of Rights. I'm going to say you discriminated against me because I have a right to life. I have a right to come in and have a burger and fries, and I don't have to tell you what my private information is to do that. I have a Privacy Act protecting me. I am free to walk in. I'm not doing anything criminal, and yet you kicked me out. And what did you base it on? You based it on my potential status, because you don't even know what it is, because I wouldn't show it to you at all. I have the right to remain silent. I don't have to tell you what my medicinal status is. Yet you decided to discriminate against me based on the fact that I wouldn't tell you my personal information. I also have security of the person. How secure am I giving my personal information to some small pub and grub owner? You think I can give you my personal information and feel secure about that? How do I know what you're going to do with that information? I know nothing about you, and I'm not secure. You're not even in the healthcare industry. Why are you asking me those questions and trying to collect that information from me? And also, I have a right to what? Equality before the law. Were you being equal to me by segregating me and saying if I don't give you this information that's personal, I can't come in to eat a burger and fries? Yikes, I think I got a good case here. And of course, I have my freedom of religion, and I can show you the Christian Bible that I read regularly because I believe in Jesus Christ alone for my salvation. And the scriptures say that I should never do anything that goes against my conscience. Because it indeed affects my soul and my eternal position. Now, is that all I have? No. The good news is, as I mentioned, I have the Canadian Human Rights Act as well. And what does it say in the Canadian Human Rights Act? Let me highlight this section right here for us. And I'm going to go to about right here. So again, this is Canadian Human Rights Act. This is for every Canadian, everyone, law of the land. The purpose of this act is to extend the laws in Canada to give effect within the purview of matters coming within the legislative authority of Parliament, not of the health units of the Parliament, to the principle that all individuals, not some, not just the ones that you feel have been stabby-jabby to your liking, all individuals should have an opportunity equal with other individuals to make for themselves the lives. You're threatening my livelihood? Well, then how can I have the same life as other individuals potentially have when you're taking my opportunities away? You're giving me no equal opportunity to have that life. See, I have a right to make for myself the life that I am able and wish to have, and to have my needs accommodated. Did you accommodate my needs when I came to the door, or did you just embarrass me? And then it continues, consistent with their duties and obligations as members of society, which I am indeed doing. I'm not breaking any laws whatsoever, which includes the Trespass to Property Act because I left when you told me to. Just now I'm suing you instead, and you should have been accommodating me without me being hindered in or prevented from doing so by discriminatory practices. Oh, here's one of my favorites today. Genetic characteristics. What was that? My genetic characteristics. Are you discriminating against me based on my genetic characteristics? Well, I'm going to suggest the answer is yes. And I'm going to take you to this CDC site right here. And I'm going to scroll up real quick just to show you that this is the CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. There it is. And this is a myths and facts section. So allow me to read this section right here. What does that say? Does that say genetic material? I believe it does. Both mRNA and viral vector stabby jabbies deliver instructions, genetic material to our cells to start building protection, etc., etc. Did you want to know what genetic characteristics I have? Do you want to know what genetic characteristics or genetic material is being sent to my cells? Is that what you're asking me for? Because according to the Canadian Human Rights Act, you're not supposed to be discriminating against me based on that. So how dare you kick me out of this location based on my genetic characteristics? I'd make that argument, that's for sure. I feel pretty confident with that. And of course, I'm going to take you to section 3 of the same document. And it says the same thing for all purposes of this act. The prohibited grounds, it's prohibited grounds of discrimination is including religion. And of course, it includes genetic characteristics. Now in section 3 of section 3, it mentions the PCR test. Isn't that interesting? Where the ground of discrimination is refusal of a request to undergo genetic test or to disclose or authorize the disclosure of the results of a genetic test, the discrimination shall be deemed to be on the ground of genetic characteristics. So even the PCR test is considered to be a discrimination under the genetic characteristic label. So if you can't even ask me to disclose to you my PCR test, you think you have the right to ask me what my stabby jabby status is? Oh, I don't think so. I'm going to argue in a court of law because now that you've acted as an agent, because you're a private person, but you were enforcing a law, well, I'm going to argue that that was not reasonable and that you were not justified. On the Canadian Bill of Rights, it tells me that you are not justified in doing so, and my Canadian Human Rights Act also says that you're discriminating against me. And by the way, in case you're confused at what a discriminatory practice is, let's read about it right in the Canadian Human Rights Act. It says, denial of goods, service, facility, or accommodation. It is a discriminatory practice in the provision of goods, services, facilities, or accommodation customarily available to the general public. Is a restaurant not customarily available to the general public? I'm pretty sure that it is. I don't recall a time in my life where it wasn't. So I'm pretty sure if I want to come in for a burger and fries and a Slurpee, that's customarily available to the general public. Is there a particular reason why you're not letting me in now? I would suggest that that's discrimination according to the Canadian Human Rights Act. And a little side note, I know that it's discrimination even without this act. Let's continue. To deny or to deny access to any such good, service, facility, or accommodation to any individual, or to differentiate adversely in relation to any individual on a prohibited ground of discrimination. And of course, as I mentioned before, I would definitely bring in the genetic characteristics. And for me, my faith and my conscience and my scriptures tell me you do not do anything to your person. You never act in anything that violates your conscience. Now let's go to the Privacy Act. Remember this? The Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada? And this is a Privacy Act in brief. Okay, so there's great details, but look what it says right here in the overview in the second paragraph. At the same time, Canadians need to know that their personal information is being collected and used only according to strict rules. Really? You think Joe's Pub and Grub, who's asking me in front of the food court in front of 120 people, is collecting my information under strict rules? How are you going to preserve my right to privacy when you're asking me in front of 100 people whether or not I've been stabbed with specific concoctions? How are you going to preserve my right to privacy? Do you have a protocol for that? And by the way, how does this affect you? You're not even in the healthcare industry. How are you going to be able to professionally and properly maintain my personal information that I never had to give you in the first place? Because it has nothing to do with me eating a burger and fries. That's what I would argue in a court of law. What would I sue you for? Well, let's start with this. Extortion. What does extortion mean? The practice of obtaining something, which includes personal information, by the way. It says especially money, but it's not limited to money. The practice of obtaining something through force or threats. I would suggest employers are doing this right now to employees. You're committing the act of extortion. You have no right to do so. I'm also going to show you the criminal code that says you should not be inciting hatred. That's right. Again, federal law. What's this about? Are you inciting hatred? I would suggest that you are. Everyone who by communicating statements in any public place, incites hatred against any identifiable group. Can you identify me? If you're not letting me in, because I won't show you my ouchie fauchi status, I'm pretty identifiable. Because I can tell you right now, whoever's sitting in the food court clearly has the stabby jabby status, otherwise you wouldn't have let them in. See? They're an identifiable group, therefore you're making me an identifiable group. Yeah, in public, by the way. And that incites segregation and hatred. That's not good. Where such incitement is likely to lead to a breach of the peace is guilty of an indictable offense and is liable to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 2 years, or an offense punishable on summary conviction. So if you, by the way, are out there and you're conducting yourself like this, I'm telling you, I have no problem bringing you into a court of law and bringing this into the fold. So in case you're sitting there thinking, well, that'd be cruel. You're going to sue my 21-year-old daughter or son for, not letting you into the restaurant? Yes. Why? Because she's breaking or he's breaking the law. That's why. Do I really have to teach you that you should not discriminate against people? Well, if I do, then I'll teach it to you. And this is how I'll do it, through the law. Everyone who by communicating statements other than in private conversation willfully promotes hatred against any identifiable group is guilty of, etc., etc. You would also be guilty, of course, of uttering threats. Because why? You were telling me to leave, and you said that if I didn't leave, you were going to put a charge on me of trespassing. That's the inference here if you kick me out. That's all kinds of goodies for me to bring in front of a court of law, in front of a judge. Anyone who has decided they're going to discriminate against me or my family, whoever does the crime does the time. Whoever hits me with the baseball bat, I charge you with the offense. If you say that your boss at Joe's Grub made you hit me with the bat, well, then you're going to have to sue your boss. See, that's how it works. That's why the people in the ivory tower, they never get hit by this stuff. It's only the people on the ground who get convinced that what they're doing is legal when it clearly is not legal to do. Period. Shade just had a feisty moment. That's how I'm going to handle myself. I hope this helps someone out there. In the meantime, guys, thanks for listening. Grace and peace.